Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Chuck, and I'm a reporter here at NBC News Digital. I am here to talk to you today about a story I wrote about legalizing surrogacy, paid surrogacy, in New York State. The story is linked in the description here, but you can also find it on our website. Here it is. So basically what my story is about is there are 3 states in America that explicitly ban surrogacy right now. My story focuses on New York State, which is in the process of trying to overturn its ban. The ban states that if you want to have a child via a surrogate, say you're a straight couple that's infertile, or you're a gay couple and you need a surrogate to help you produce a child, that you cannot in New York State pay someone else to be your surrogate. So if you live in New York, then you have to go out of state to find a surrogate. And I spoke with a family, I spoke with several families actually, but a family who lives here in New York who used surrogates twice, once for their 10-year-old son and then again for their 3-year-old twins. And both times they had to go out of state to find the surrogate. The first time they went to Illinois, the second time they went to Pennsylvania. But because they obviously still live in New York, there were all sorts of complications with staying in touch with the surrogate. And then with the birth of their twins, they actually weren't there for the birth because they couldn't get to Pittsburgh in time. So they are, of course, part of the movement to get surrogacy legalized in New York, and it looks like it might actually have a chance of passing, given that Governor Cuomo has thrown his support behind it, and the state Senate recently flipped to Democratic, which also gives legislators pushing for this a little bit more support for it. Obviously that's all the people who support it, but there's also an interesting mix of people who are opposed to surrogacy. They range from the Roman Catholic Church to some feminists who say that this amounts to women selling their bodies and renting out their wombs, and it's the equivalent of baby selling and baby buying. So anyway, please say hi as you're joining, and I welcome your questions. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. As I said, the story is linked in our bio over there, but we have all sorts of graphics in there talking about the rise in surrogacy in the United States over the past decade. It's gone up quite dramatically, and there are a lot of people who are hoping that this will become legal in New York soon. So I would love your questions. My colleague Stephanie is here to help out, and she'll be giving me some questions now.
Elizabeth, what are the other 2 states that surrogacy is illegal in?
Sure. So the 3 states in America that ban surrogacy are New York State, Michigan, and Louisiana. Now, the rest of the states either have laws expressly saying that paid surrogacy is allowed here, or they don't have laws at all, which can obviously lead to some gray areas with interpretation if there were ever a court battle or a court case in those states. But yeah, Michigan, New York, and Louisiana are the 3.
And what about outside of the U.S.? Is this common in other places, in other countries?
That's a great question. Someone's asking whether or not surrogacy is common outside of the United States. Interestingly enough, as the United States has been moving toward legalizing surrogacy in recent years, around the world, the complete opposite is happening. Most of Europe bans surrogacy, and then there are other countries like India and Cambodia that have banned it. Now, the reason why they banned it is a little bit different than some of the arguments here in the United States. In India and Cambodia, for example, the governments found that many women were being exploited when it came to being surrogates. They weren't necessarily being paid, or if they were, it wasn't a fair amount, and some of them were literally being held somewhat hostage and being forced into surrogacy. So that's why those countries were banning them. One of the reproductive law attorneys that I spoke to for my story explained that when it comes to Europe, because of the religious viewpoints there, with so much of the population being Catholic, that generally speaking, they don't approve of in vitro fertilization or IVF, and that surrogacy almost always involves IVF. So she said something to me like, they don't approve of IVF, and they certainly don't approve of IVF in someone else's body.
I see a lot of people saying they're really surprised that it's not legal in New York. So can you talk a little bit about why specifically New York has not legalized it?
Yeah, I also found it surprising in my reporting that New York had not legalized surrogacy. It dates back to a very tumultuous court case from the 1980s that's referred to as the Baby M case. And it actually wasn't in New York, it was in neighboring New Jersey. But this case involved a surrogate, a woman who was hired by a wealthy couple to have their child. And she was artificially inseminated with the husband's sperm. So this is an important detail because she ended up using her own egg and was just fertilized by the husband. She didn't use a donor egg or the egg of the woman who wanted to raise the child with her husband. This is a practice that is almost never done anymore, and it's actually as a result of this court case. Now, gestational surrogacy, as it's called, involves either a donor egg from an outside donor or the egg of the mother who's going to raise the child. Anyway, so after this woman, Mary Beth Whitehead, gave birth to this child, she had a change of heart. And even though she had accepted something like $10,000 as part of the surrogacy contract, when the baby came out, she said, "I don't want to give this child to you. I want to keep her for myself." She said she has half of my DNA, which was true since it was her egg that was fertilized. And she said, "I don't want to give her to you. Here's the money back." So this resulted in a very protracted court battle over the parental custody rights of this young girl. And ultimately, the case went to the state Supreme Court in New Jersey, and they ruled in favor of the couple who had hired the surrogate. But anyway, that created a lot of skittishness, of course, across the country, but particularly in New York, where there was a lot of media attention paid to this case, and it was so nearby. So interestingly enough, New Jersey actually overturned its ban last year on paid surrogacy, but New York has continued to be a holdout.
Do you know what the Roman Catholic Church's reasons are for being against surrogacy?
Sure. So the Catholic Church feels that this is inarguably exploitation of women. They also feel that it is something that is most often targeted to poor women, and they also just feel like babies shouldn't be commoditized, for lack of a better word. They feel that this amounts to creating babies against the will of God, and that babies should be created in the way that God intended them to.
Someone is asking how many babies are born through surrogacy in the U.S. every year. How common is it?
Sure. So the latest data that we have is actually from 2015, and in that year in the U.S. there were about 2,800 babies born. So that might not sound like a ton, but given that surrogacy is actually quite an expensive procedure and process from beginning to end, it can, at the minimum, it can cost $80,000, and that's if you're using your own egg as opposed to going through the process of purchasing an egg from an egg donor. And at the high end, it can go up to $250,000. That might be in the case of multiples, or it might be if you've had many failed IVF rounds and you're, continuing the process, but it's really very expensive. And, we often hear it associated with celebrities like Kim Kardashian, and Ricky Martin recently had a child by a surrogate, but, there are regular people too who are doing it, but it's very expensive. And that number from 2015 is way up from a decade prior. In 2004, it was somewhere around 700 babies, so it's significantly up. So yeah, I think that is just about all of the questions that we have and all the time that we have for now. But the New York law, or the New York bill rather, is expected to be voted on sometime in March or April. So look for an update then when and if they pass it. And thank you all so much for joining this Facebook Live. Speak with you soon.